Yeah, but I wanted a table.
You know how you steal that stuff. First time you use it, you say, yeah, Dana said this. Next time you use it.
Yeah, you got it 3 times.
I've often said, or I've often heard it said, or pretty much said, the next time you use it, well, I always
No,
say.
you gotta give me credit 3 times. Then it's yours on the 4th time.
Yeah, you know, we do the Zoom meetings for the Rock Stop Care Crew, and Bill comes on the Zoom meeting, and so he'll, we were both talking about your big book study and bringing up your points and stuff. Bill Deviney, he's from CA over there, older gentleman, it's from Wisconsin. Probably.
I'll be like watching everybody walk around.
We did lose a lot of people, didn't we?
Yeah. Hey, guys. Hey, Jeff, that really looked good.
Yeah, a lot of different camera this time.
It looked a lot better than this does.
Yeah, that's all right. And just, if you have an SD card input on this, we can just pop it over.
I don't know. What's
It
an
does,
SD
it's
card?
over here. It's on the left side. Do you have the adapter for it though? Because it looks like it's the larger file
Yeah,
size.
that's a large one. Yeah, it's a big one.
Okay.
That's it.
Uh-oh. Yeah, I'm using both of these. Dariuch. What's up, bro?
This is your friendly reminder for Danny's big book study. Here we go. See you on the Zoom meeting if you're available.
Good.
Make club. Good trip.
Wow, where'd you plug in? Down the block? So now when you put that on here, I just go to my YouTube channel and where am I gonna find it on here? Okay. Can you put it on the desktop? All right.
We're gonna be out of town next week.
Hey, bro, I guess that wasn't him on here. All right, everybody, you can grab a seat. Let's grab a seat.
Yes, sir.
All right. Hi, everybody. Okay. So last week we left off at, we were talking about, we were using the analogy of the soldier, right? Last week. The soldier out in the field, surrounded by the enemy.
Yeah.
Right? And he's got 2 choices. He could throw his rifle down and throw his hands up and surrender, or he can stay there and fight it out, which is a sure death. He thinks about, for me, I don't want to die, so he throws his rifle down, throws his hands up, and they grab him, they're marching him off to the prison camp, and as they're marching off to the prison camp, he goes, what's that mean?
Did you make that announcement about
Yeah, your cars, if you got a car outside, make sure it's locked. Okay. So they're marching him off to the prison camp. He says, I'm your prisoner, but I gotta be with my girlfriend. I'm your prisoner, but I need my own apartment, you know. Just silly things, right? That's where we left off last week. And we were talking, the reason we're talking about that is because what I said to you is that any condition you put upon your sobriety, you have no sobriety at all. All you have is the condition thereof. And even if it's a good condition, I want to be sober because I want to change my life. Doesn't matter. You have no sobriety, you just have the condition to that sobriety. Let's say you're sober and your life changes and you're doing good. What's the need for sobriety anymore? You've met your condition. So any condition you have on your sobriety, you have no sobriety at all. And then what I was talking about there, what we didn't get into was the, the difference between surrender and unconditional surrender. And all we got to do is look at history, and we can see a perfect example of that at the end of World War II. What happened to Japan? We had to drop a couple of nukes on the Japanese. And in the Pacific Ocean on a battleship, they unconditionally surrendered to the armed forces. Okay, I mean, we just annihilated 2 cities and just destroyed them, and they unconditionally surrendered to the armed forces in the middle of the Pacific Ocean there, right? And ever since then, if you look at the Japanese today, and for a long time now, they're a very prosperous country. They're doing well for themselves, and their citizens do well. It's a good country. The opposite of that is the Germans. In World War II, they did not unconditionally surrender. They surrendered. And what happened to Germany is, again, history shows us that split in half. Many years of communist, Eastern Germany, Western Germany, democratic. So they did not prosper, and their people did not prosper because they never really unconditionally surrendered. And I have like a personal example for me. When I was a little kid, I had 2 older brothers. So growing up in my neighborhood, I can remember one time I'm walking down the street, and I got to walk by where my brother and them are hanging out, and they grabbed me, they threw me on the ground, and you know that neighborhood, Susan. And they threw me on the ground, they picked my shirt up, and they started giving me a pink belly. You remember a pink belly? And they kept doing it until I say uncle. That, for some reason, that's the key word, right? And so I learned quick, like the next time they grabbed me and threw me down and started giving me a pat, I said, uncle, and they let me up. And the guy who let me up, I went to kick him in the nuts and run away. He said, because I really didn't surrender. I just did what I had to do to not get a pink belly and get hurt anymore, right? And that's how I spent my life. Just doing, if I got to do this, I'll do that. If I got to say this, I'll say that, just to get by. But I really didn't unconditionally surrender. Neither did the Germans at the end of World War II. And so what we're talking about here is unconditional surrender. Learning how to surrender unconditionally. That means I'm your prisoner. What do I have to do? And I don't have any conditions upon that, right? And that's a good place to be. All right. So another thing, before we get back in the book, another thing is that I wanted to talk about was the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous was written to raise the bottom for drunks like us. If you remember, I think on week 1, or week 2, we talked about the percentage of people getting sober today is around 15% compared to 1955, when it was around 75%, right? the book says 50% got sober at once, remained that way, and 25 after a couple of relapses. So in 1955, 75% of people that came in and tried got sober. And the statistic today is about 15%. And we talked about that a couple of weeks ago in here. Why is that? You know, some maybe drugs are easy and alcohol is plentiful and all that stuff, but those things have very little sway to the equation. It's and we talked about that in 1956 that the AMA declared alcoholism a disease, and that ever since then hospitals have been trying, and treatment centers and all these kind-hearted people that want to help us, and little by little we've gotten away from the program recovery as it is written in the big book. So it's important to know that. Why is it important that the book was written and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous to raise the bottom? What does that really mean? What are we talking about when we read that in our literature? And I want to do it. So if you have your 12 and 12 with you, it's in the 12 and 12. Go to page 22. And at the bottom of page 22 in the 12 and 12, it says, in AA's pioneering time, none but the most desperate cases could swallow and digest this unpalatable truth. Even these last gaspers often had difficulty in realizing how hopeless they actually were. But a few did, and when these laid hold of AA principles, with all the fervor of which drowning seized life preservers, they almost invariably got well. That is why the first edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, published when our membership was small, dealt with low bottom cases only. Many less desperate alcoholics tried AA, but did not succeed because they could not make the admission of hopelessness. It is a tremendous satisfaction to record that in the following years, this changed. Alcoholics who still had their health, their families, their jobs, and even 2 cars in the garage began to recognize their alcoholism. As this trend grew, they were joined by young people who were scarcely more than potential alcoholics. They were spared the last 10 or 15 years of literal hell the rest of us had gone through. Since step 1 requires an admission that our lives have become unmanageable, how could people such as these take this step? It was obviously necessary to raise the bottom the rest of us had hit to the point where it would hit them. Okay, so, because you've heard me say it, and if you didn't hear me say, you'll hear me say many times during this, we'll go through these things, is that most of the people in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous are not real alcoholics yet. They're potential alcoholics, but they're not real alcoholics yet. And that's why a lot of people, you'll see a lot of people with, I've shared with you before, I was doing this same class in Florida for 7 years, and one of the guys there, I think at that time he had like 45 years sober. And he asked me to sponsor him, and I said, why do you want me to sponsor? He said, I never went through the book. 45 years sober, never went through the book. There's a lot of people like that. You may be surprised. I don't know. You're very fortunate because Oklahoma has a very strong recovery program. I've been all over the country and all over the world, and there's some good spots and there's some really weak spots, and more weak spots than good spots. But Oklahoma's got good, strong recovery, so you should be thankful for that. So a lot of people have never really gotten into the book. So the problem is when somebody, let's just say, I'm just making this figure up because I don't have any statistic to back it up. Let's just say 80% of the people in the rooms are not real alcoholics. Probably more than that, probably 90, but let's just say 80% of the people in the rooms are not real alcoholics. Potential alcoholics, sure, but not full-blown alcohol, not a real alcohol like we're going to study in this book real soon. We're going to go over what a real alcoholic is, right? So let's say 80% of people in the rooms are not real alcoholics. Doesn't matter. If you go after this and you can, and all you have to do is convince yourself that you are a real alcoholic, and you do this stuff and you'll be fine, right? The problem is that people that are really dying from this disease, people that are really dying, come in here and take hold of this program because it's the life preserver that we just talked about. It's the, it's exactly what I just said. It's the life preserver. So I was dying when I got here and I grabbed hold of this thing and it saved my life. And I haven't let go of it all these years later. I still have it, right? I'm still holding on to it. And that's the difference between, so I'm convinced that when I got here, I was a real alcoholic. Maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was part of the 80%, but I've convinced myself that I was. That's the important thing. And I chased this thing the way I chased that stuff out there. Okay. I was laughing because I heard on the news before this afternoon that there's an ice storm in Michigan going to hit around 7 o'clock tonight. And I laughed because I thought, I'm sure somebody's not going to come here tonight because an ice storm is going to hit in Michigan at 7 o'clock tonight, right? And then I heard that maybe around midnight tonight, it might be some icy rain here, right? It's certainly some people are not going to come tonight. But those same people that don't go to a meeting because of that, I bet you they went and got drunk or got loaded in any type of weather, right? So it's about chasing this the way we chase that out there, okay? And here's the problem. When somebody that comes in here and it's not a real alcoholic, doesn't mean they're not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, doesn't mean they're not a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay, they can be great members of Alcoholics Anonymous. But one of the problems is that a lot of these people come in here, they don't take the directions out of the book and apply them in their life because they stopped drinking, their life got better. Now they got a bunch of friends and they got stuff going on, working well for them. And they weren't dying from this. Okay, you got another one trying to get in. So when you're dying from this, then this is the life preserver that'll save you. Okay. And when you get somebody that is a real alcoholic that comes in here and hears somebody in the room say something pretty cool, right? And we all got, we're all good talkers, right? And when we hear something when we say it in a meeting, and here's a new person that's a real alcoholic that hears something really cool out of somebody's mouth, and they go up and ask them to sponsor them. And this happens a lot today in Alcoholics Anonymous, even in Oklahoma, all over the place. Very common. That person will say to them, sure, I'll sponsor you. Are you powerless over alcohol? Yeah. Is your life unmanageable? Yeah. Do you believe in God? I don't know. Are you willing to believe in God? Are you willing to believe that I believe in God? Okay. You ready to make a decision to turn your will and your life? I guess so. All right, let's sit down and write an inventory. You got to do a 4th step. You see, and they have skipped. Remember we did the triangle with the circle, and we focused on the program part of the recovery, right? They've skipped, and then we did that the program is broken into 3 parts. What is the problem? What is the solution? What is the program of action? Right? That's how the program is broken down, and that's how the big book is also broken down. And when you take somebody new and you take them right to the step 4 like that, you have bypassed the first 2 parts of the program. You've bypassed what is the problem and what is the solution. And you've immediately taken them to program of action. A program of action of what? They don't have any idea what they suffer from. But you see, that person doesn't need to go through the steps because their life doesn't depend on it. So you need to act as if your life depended on this, whether you're a real alcoholic or not. We can't say you are or you aren't. If you're here, I'm going to assume that you think you are. So that's real important to get into the program, to get into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and to tear it apart and learn all the things that was going to save your life and change your life. All right. So anybody got any questions about that?
Yeah, question.
Yes.
Where would you say officially the program of action starts?
The program of action starts the minute you walk in the rooms. Let's see here. Go to page 58 in your book. Second paragraph. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. As some of these we bought, we thought we could find an easier, softer way. I don't know about you, but I almost killed myself trying to find an easier, softer way. But we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. So that answers your question. Where does the program of action start? Right there at the very beginning, the minute you walk in the door. You know, I'm sure you didn't go to the bar and, you know, and drink Shirley Temples until you got comfortable with the surroundings and everything, right? You went right in and got your double shot of whiskey and all that stuff, right? Right from the very start. So that's what we got to do here, right from the very start. Now, I asked you guys last week, that those of you that have been sober for a while, to figure out what you're going to work the steps on. So I hope you guys have been thinking about it and have something that you're going to work the steps on. Because if you're 10 years sober, 20 years sober, 15 years or 30 years sober, there's no reason why you should be working the steps on alcohol and drugs. I can't tell you how many times over here somebody come up to me and say, I love what you shared, Danny. Thanks a lot. You know, I just started working the steps again myself, you know, 12 years sober. I go, oh, great. What are you working the steps on? Alcohol and drugs. And I go, why? You know, it's like praying for a new car. You get a new car and go to bed that night, you pray for a new car again. Don't make sense. You got your new car. You're sober. Okay. Now you got to grow spiritually. The book tells us why 2 reasons when people go back out. It's 2 reasons according to the book. 1, they've never taken the first step 100%. Our literature tells us we got to do the first step 100%. Okay. And 2, they fail to enlarge their spiritual life. One of those 2 things is why people go back out. But either way, you do a good first step. What I tell you, when you do a good first step, you'll know the truth about yourself. Once you know the truth about yourself, you'll never be able to drink and use on that truth again, ever. You have to be blocked off from the truth and buy some insane lie in order for you to drink and use again. And that's where enlarging your spiritual life comes in. Because if you enlarge your spiritual life, you're hooked up to this stair, you're not going to be blocked off from the truth. You can't be cut off from the truth if you're staying in the truth with everybody. There's a lot of power in these rooms. A lot of power in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and the meetings. And don't mistake the meetings for the program of recovery, but they're not. They're 2 different things. But there's a lot of power in here. And you want to test something out, go to a meeting, any meeting you want, and ask everybody in the meeting separately by themselves, catch them before or after the meeting, ask them a question about something you're going through. I don't know what kind of answers you'll get. You'll probably get some sick answers. You'll probably get some good answers, you know. I don't know. But if you asked in the meeting, you're only going to get real good spiritual help. Because something happens when we all come together for this hour that is just, it's undescribable. It's real and it works. And so we are very fortunate because we have the tools to change our life. I don't know how many people, you know, I know a lot of people that could use this shit. Yeah, for the main alcoholics, but it doesn't matter. They could really use this stuff to change their life, right? But so we're very fortunate, and don't misuse that fortune by not doing what you're supposed to do. But you know, if you're anything like me, I already know more than I'm willing to do. So I gotta stay real on point here. All right, I think we left off on page 5, right?
Yes.
So we talked about Bill writing that first paragraph there on page 5, that how crazy if you ask a normal person to read that paragraph, right? We did that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So a couple of paragraphs down, he said, I woke up, this had to be stopped. I saw, did we do that?
Yeah.
We did that too? How about the bottom page, renewing my resolve?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the same thing as I woke up, the same thing. He's just renewing my resolve. He's pulling out his willpower again He's gonna attack this problem with his willpower. Okay, first paragraph on page 6. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. Wow. That is some really strong first step stuff right there, right? The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. And he talks about terrible sense of impending calamity. When I got here, I had a terrible sense of impending calamity. I found out what it was, you know. You know what it was? It was impending calamity. It was real. So I mean, I love that writing because Bill gets so poetic in his description of how he was feeling. You know, and then he talks about the mind and the body are marvelous mechanisms. For mine endured this agony 2 more years. And I shared with you the best way to study the book, right? Read 2 paragraphs, stop, think about what you read, write your questions right in the book, then go reread them, then go on to the next 2 paragraphs. Also, as you read this book, as you study this book, you should try to relate what you're reading in each paragraph to your own personal life. Doesn't matter that this is 1934 he's talking about. We're talking about feelings. And one thing about feelings for alcoholics and addicts is this. If it were possible for every one of you to take all your feelings right now and throw them right here on this table, and I said, okay, pick your feelings up, you wouldn't be able to tell which ones are yours, which ones are his or hers. Because remember that test tube we did, right? It's all about that. We all got these same horrible, terrible, negative feelings. And I knew I was shot for. Then nobody in my family or my friends had the nerve to tell me, you got to do something about yourself. So they just kept their distance. So Bill thought he was going to die, all right? And he started thinking about killing himself. And at the bottom of page 6, he tells the doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. So this here, and also if you read Dr. Bob's story, both of them will talk about drugs and alcohol, you know. So, you know, we're supposed to keep our discussion in an AA meeting confined to how it relates to alcohol, right? How it relates to alcoholism. Well, Bill's relating his alcoholism with a sedative here, and so does Dr. Bob. So, you know, but when I'm in AA, I don't really talk about alcohol. I'm trying to talk about the problem too much. But I mean, but some people just don't like that. But here's Bill and there's Bob over there talking about it. So. Okay. Then at the bottom of the first paragraph there, he says, best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. Again, the twofold disease, right? And over and over again, I think I asked you to mark each time we come across that, because there's like 156 or 158 times that he's mental and physical, mind and body. So then Bill thought he got sober and he thought he found the answer. And then down at the third paragraph is not, for that frightful day came and he drank again. And he started, you know, his declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. He said, this was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing life was informed that it would all end with heart failure during DTs, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. They didn't need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who I thought so well of myself and my abilities and my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark. Bill gets so poetic, I'm telling you. You gotta love the guy. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining the endless procession of sots that had gone on before me. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. So he's really in a real desperate, we all kind of get that, it's like I used to hang out in a bar and used to put the quarter in the jukebox and play that same song over and over and over again, right? So friggin' depressing, I had the place in my neighborhood, the guy said, they took the song out. I used to play Bobby Darin's song, Beyond the Sea. I used to play it over and over and over again. He took that out of the jukebox. Again, nobody would say to me, don't play that shit no more. So now Bill says, no words, another great first step talking here. He says, no words could tell of the loneliness and despair I found myself in the bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Wow. Pretty strong saying there, huh? He said, trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then he drank again, of course. And then he says in this paragraph, he talks about how dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last part. I was soon captivated into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. Does anybody not know what that is? Does everybody in here know what the fourth dimension of existence? Raise your hand if you don't know what that is. Okay. It's really nothing. There is no fourth dimension of existence. Bill is just using an example. There's three dimensions of existence: spiritual, mental, and physical. And Bill is saying that this program is something even beyond that. It's so good that it's beyond the three dimensions that exist. It's a fourth dimension. It just sounds good. He uses that twice in the book here. But there's really no fourth dimension. Maybe there is. Maybe the Martians will tell us about it one day. I don't know. But it's a metaphor for Bill. That's what he's using it for. So then Bill's talking about maybe hiding a bottle of booze that his wife won't find, and how he's going to get through the day. And then at the bottom of the page, he said, my musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner, and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. He was an oasis in this dreary desert of fertility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. He's an oasis, he's telling, right? So Bill's saying that all he could think about is these days in the past, right? So think about where Bill is. He's thinking about killing himself. He's wondering if he's going to make it through the day. He's hopeless. He's finished. He's conceding defeat. And now he's thinking about his friend is Ebby Thatcher that's coming over. He's thinking Ebby's coming over and he's thinking, huh? And he's remembering the days that have passed. Why is that important? He's remembering the days that have passed because look at his situation. Right now, he's hopeless, helpless, clueless, desperate. Tomorrow, he doesn't even know if tomorrow's going to come for him. He's got no tomorrow. The only thing he can get any kind of comfort from is once upon a time, how it was. You've been there? You've been in that spot? I couldn't dream of tomorrow when I was lost before I came in these rooms. Couldn't see tomorrow. I couldn't see past my next 5 minutes, if that long. And my condition and my mentality at the moment was totally hopeless. Didn't want to even think about it anymore. That's why, remember we did the test tube thing, we drink so we get rid of that, right? That's why Dr. Bob said, after they have succumbed to the desire again, because feeling all those things, you gotta medicate it, right? So I don't want to feel that stuff or think about anything, so I medicate. But I could sit down and I could think about once upon a time when I, took a limo to the Hilton and spent the weekend, it was nice. A few years later, I took a cab to the Days Inn, A few years after that, I was in this place called No Trespassing. So Abby's coming over and Bill's thinking about once upon a time. It's the only thing that can bring him any comfort. Make sense? You understand that? You relating to Bill a little bit now? All right. So Bill says the door opened and he stood there, fresh skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. It was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what he got into this fellow. What had gotten into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? He queried, and he looked at him, and then Ebby's telling him, basically Ebby was, just give you a quick rundown of what happened to Ebby. He was up, I think, in New Hampshire or somewhere up there, and he kept getting locked up, got in a lot of trouble, drunk, and they were going to lock him up for alcohol insane asylum, kind of whatever they had, some law up there. And Roland and another guy came to court, and they were all prominent people in the community. They were all wealthy. They all come from wealthy families. And Roland was a member of the Oxford group, and Roland's the guy that went over to see Dr. Young. And so they went to court, and they knew the judge, and they said, let him, we have something that, we have a program that'll work for him. And the judge says, okay, I'll release him to you, but he's got to leave state. And they took him out, and he was in the Oxford group for 5-6 months or something, and he was sober. And he came down to see Bill because one of the steps was to pass it on and help somebody else, right? So he came down to see Bill. And Bill was a gust, he said. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crap out. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. But he did no ranting. In a matter-of-fact way, he told me how 2 men had appeared in court persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. That was 2 months ago. I'm sorry, it was 2 months ago. And the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass his experience along to me, if I cared to have it. I was shocked, but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. So if you're really hopeless, listen, I'll listen to anything you got to say. If there's any type of anything I could grab onto, a little ounce of hope for me in there, I'll listen to you. Another thing, take note of this here, right? Abby Thatcher was 2 months sober. And here he is going to sponsor Bill. He was Bill's sponsor. Some people say you got to have a year sober before you can sponsor. You have 6 months sober. You got 3 years. You got to finish this step or that step. Now, somebody with 2 days sober can help somebody with 1 day sober, but obviously you can't pass on something you haven't got. So you got to remember that too. You have to do this stuff in order to pass it on. So you have to get this alive and well in your life, and then you can pass it on, but you can help people, certainly. So anyway, but I thought it was interesting. Ebby's 2 months sober, and there he is reaching out. And he's talking about, Bill starts reminiscing about his grandfather and about being in the war and all that, the Winchester Cathedral and all that good stuff. And then, he's talking about the world's religions. He says, I parted at the bottom of the page. I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. To Christ, I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teachings most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregard. So Bill's got a little bit of an attitude with God, right? A little bit. Not so much unlike you guys. He said, but my friend sat before me and he had the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at the minute, and that was none at all. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. That's an important statement. Bill's sitting across the table from Ebby, and he's in his mind, he's saying that he knows that Ebby's got something going on for himself. He's looking good. He's got, you can see it in his eyes. He's sober. He's got something happening for him. And Bill Systems, had this power originated in him? Obviously had not. Why that? Because he knew him, right? They used to get loaded together. He knew he didn't have this power. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at the minute, and that was none at all. So he knows that here's a man sitting across the table from me. He's certainly sober. There's certainly something happening in his life. And it didn't originate with him, this power. He got it somewhere. Anybody, any one of you would have to be asking yourself, where the hell did he get it and what is it? Well, what is it and where can I get it, right? Look what Bill says. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in the human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. Right? Here's a guy I got loaded with. Here's a guy I knew what kind of a drunk he was. And here's a guy that's not like that anymore. Something is different about him. Where did he get this? He said, I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped new soil. Being the good drunk that Bill is, he immediately switches gears now and goes, despite that fact, never mind that here's a miracle sitting in front of me. There's something not right here. It ain't going to happen for me. I'm not going for this creative intelligence or this czar of the nature, spirit of the nature, universal mind, czar of the heavens. However loving his sway might be, ain't for me, that shit. And then he said, my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Whoa, hold on now. Now we are at the crux of a huge, huge solution. There's two important points that statement makes. Two important points that statement makes. When Ebby says to Bill, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Two important points. One, if I choose my own conception of God, I can't argue with nobody, can I? It's my idea. But even more important, I think, maybe not, but for me, when Ebby tells Bill to choose his own conception of God, at that point, he is no longer carrying a religious message. You get it? There is no religion on this earth that allows you to determine your own conception of God. Every religion has what we call dogma. This is God, and this is how you get there. Every religion has that. None of them say, we don't know what God is. You decide and you figure out how to get there. No, there's no religion that does that. Except Alcoholics Anonymous. Choose your own conception of God. Who are you going to argue with? I just came up with an idea of who God is. Who am I going to argue with? Myself? If I tell you about it and I want to argue, you say, hey, that's your idea. Cool. Not my idea, but it's your idea. If it works for you, good. Now, when we get into step 2, we're going to talk about God because people, you hear crazy shit in meetings. You hear people say, use anything as God, use the doorknob, the light bulb, the dog, the tree, all that bullshit. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous defines, and we're going to do it when we get to step 2, but the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'll show you where it's at, defines 2 things that are required for you to have a higher power. Okay. One of them is right in the second step itself. A power greater than ourselves. That's one thing that the higher power has to be. The other is has to make sense to you. And both of those statements are in the big book. So you can't say, the doorknob is my higher power. That is, that is sick. There's no sweet way to say this. That's bullshit and it's sick. I'll kick your door in. I'll knock your light bulb out. I'll cut your tree down. What are you going to do then? You're godless. Now, God, when we talk about a higher power, it's got to be a power greater than ourselves, and it has to make sense to you. Those are the 2 requirements of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, if a doorknobs make sense to you as a higher power, let's talk about that. Because I've worked with people and I've had some strange higher powers. And I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to like it, but it has to be a power greater than us and has to make sense to you. So if you think that the doorknob makes sense to you, let's talk about that. Because the doorknob is certainly not a power greater than me. I just told you I could kick your door in, right? So you need to discuss that with whoever you're working with. Let's get on the footing where the book wants us to be. It's got to be a power greater than us and it has to make sense to you. Okay? So, but we'll go deep into that when we get into the second step. So, why did I even bring that up? What was I talking about? Huh?
How God is defined.
Oh, yeah. Your own concept of God. Thank you. I go off in these little tirades of mine. So. Listen, you know how many people come into the rooms and they spend time negotiating the terms of their surrender and like Bill is mind screwing himself, right? It's a miracle sitting right in front of him, but yet I'm not going to believe this about God, So we have to surrender unconditionally. There's no negotiating the terms of your surrender. That's it. I'm it. What do I got to do? All right. People come in the rooms and they begin to start to get ready to get sober. Just do what you're told and your life will change. Okay, so now Bill says, we're back on page 12. He says, that statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. Take note of that, to make my beginning. So I have to be willing to believe in a power greater than myself to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. So again, I've never rejected my own concept of something, of anything. And there's no religious message being pushed on me. Two very important points. So he's got upon a foundation of complete willingness. So willingness is our foundation. Okay. Willingness is also a concept for the first step, really, because I have to be willing to change, right? And getting beat down and feeling hopeless and helpless and loveless and clueless and godless and all that stuff helps me to be willing to change. So when I'm willing to change, then the second step is what? It's a chance to change, right? It's a solution for me to change. The third step is a decision for me to change. The fourth and the fifth steps are actions for me to change. The sixth and the seventh step is more actions for me to change. The eighth and the ninth steps is more actions for me to change. The 10th and 11th step, more action for me to change. And the 12th step, I've changed. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. I'm able to do, be, and act like I've never been able to do, be, and act before. That's awakening spiritually. And it all begins with a foundation of willingness. All right. So really, over here on when he talks about upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. That's really Bill taking step 2 right there. All right, page 13. He says how blind I had been. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of DTs. And now these next 2 paragraphs, these next 3 paragraphs, actually the rest of this page, Bill is going to talk about the 12 steps. And you might want to mark your book if you want. So he starts off with step 3. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. That's all third step. I ruthlessly faced my sins. Fourth step. And became willing to have my newfound friend take them away root and branch. 6 and 7. I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. Step 5. We made a list, 8 and 9, of people I had hurt or to whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. It's 8 and 9. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. Step 10. The rest of this paragraph is step 11. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself except as my requests bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. My friend promised me when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator. This is the 12th step, right? That I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Make note of that. We're not just talking about alcohol and drugs. In fact, the only step that talks about alcohol and drugs is step 1. After step 1, we're not talking about alcohol and drugs anymore. We're talking about you. Step 2 is the solution, and 3 to 12 is the way to that solution. So I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of the light who presides over us all. He says these were revolutionary change and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity I have never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. Now, the reason they have the appendix in the back of the book is because they didn't want to give the impression to everybody that you're supposed to get a quick boom awakening, that it may come different ways. In fact, the appendix talks about most people get the variety kind, right? Comes a little at a time. But for Bill, he got, and I've sponsored some people over the years that had got exactly like Bill, got it right away. They got it right away, and I'm trying to think. I know three guys off the top of my head, and I know two of them wound up going back out because they didn't want to do the work. They didn't have to do the work. They got the profound effect immediately. Right? They're like what we talked about earlier. Maybe the people that are not real alcoholics that don't really, their life didn't depend on this. All right. The doctor tells him something happened. You don't know what it is, but you better hang on to it. Then bottom paragraph says, my friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it's just like that. So Bill says, if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life, you know what the definition of the word perfect is? Definition of that word is as good as it possibly can be, to be. As good as it's possible to be. Perfect. All right. So now let's put the whole sentence together though, because we kind of cut it off a lot. He says, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. So we're not just talking about perfecting and enlarging your spiritual life. We're talking about doing it through work and sacrifice. So work, doing the steps and living these principles, but also doing it with helping others. So if you're leaving out the helping others part, I wish I had $1 every time somebody said to me, I don't sponsor people, but it's like, what they really say is, I don't work the 12 step at all. I don't. So, let's see if we can get through this. So Bill went out and started working with people like crazy. At the bottom, the last paragraph says, in the middle of the last paragraph, he says, I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. So we're talking about taking these principles and applying them to all different things in life, not just alcohol and drugs. You got to keep working the step. It works on everything. Any problem you have, the answers in the book and the steps will help fix that. So the 12 steps of recovery is going to solve all my problems, not just going to solve my alcohol and drug problem. It's going to solve all my problems. There's I don't know, 140 something 12-step fellowships. I probably qualify for at least half of them, but I don't need to go there because I got this here. This works. This book and these steps work on every area of my life. And so it's about continuously growing spiritual. You want to continue to grow spiritual, you keep doing this stuff. Anybody got any questions? Anybody online there got any questions? We're gonna
Hey, Danny,
leave.
I'm Nancy. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Nancy.
So step 12,
See, she's a good alcoholic. She's on step 12 already. Go
well,
ahead.
no, it's about that spiritual experience as a result of working the steps, right? And
Yes.
so when I'm talking with a new person, right?
Mhm.
And awesome if they have that white light, right? But even though Bill had that white light and just quick up there, got that spiritual experience, he did work all those steps. He continued to work with others. He did all those things, even though he had that change right away. I'm just
Well,
trying to figure out the
actually,
right
Bill
way to
did
kind of,
that. Actually, Bill did that more after he was sober than he did to get sober. But that was. Bill,
Right.
because he was,
so to stay, I could just, it just, sometimes things run around in my head and I'm not trying to,
No, you're fine.
yeah.
No, you're
Okay.
fine. Yeah, listen, it's a 24-hour day program, okay? I haven't met
I
anybody.
need
that's
25.
been able to squeeze 36 hours out of one of these days here. So it's a day at a time program. You do it today, you get up tomorrow, you got to do it all over again.
Or you drink.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Either you drink or your life gets so miserable that you want to drink.
Right. Okay, thanks, Danny.
All right, honey, thank you. All right, guys, we'll leave it there and see you next week, same time, same channel.
Thanks for having me.
Yay. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
Bye.
Nancy,
Thanks,
thank
Danny.
you for the question, honey.
Thank you.
Danny. Thanks, Danny.
Yeah.